cycle, some interesting statistics. There were 24 debates on the Republican side alone. President Obama did not have much of a primary, and 23 of those debates focused solely on domestic policy. Today's environment says we've got to go beyond domestic policy because the world is very dangerous. And some of the issues today, hopefully, will bring that to the forefront for you. APPS has groups in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. As I said, the candidates look forward to these, as I know you do too, and we're excited to be here today on behalf of the organization. About today's event, I will be the moderator, as I said here, and I have a series of questions for Dr. Carson. After about 30 or 35 minutes, I will close that with the last question, and then I'll afford Dr. Carson 10 or 15 minutes, or whatever time you want to take, sir, to talk to this great group of folks here. Now, about Gaffney, I think you know, it's a great place, steeped in history, great peaches, a fantastic water tower, and home of President Frank Underwood. Kevin Spacey from Netflix. A great place for today's venue. If you have questions, please write them on the 3x5 cards, and they will get them to me, and I'll input those as we move through today's debate. As we conclude today, I'll ask Dr. Carson to stand up here if you want to come by and shake his hand. As you leave the room here, he'll be more than happy to do so. Everybody got the rules? Great. I want to follow this chair and create a safety hazard here, Dr. Carson. Dr. Carson, what do you see as America's proper place in the world? Our global responsibility, and what is our role to protect our freedom and liberty and further world order, because the world is indeed a dangerous place.
No question about it. First of all, I'm delighted to be here. Glad to get some questions on national security. I never get them in a debate. They act like I'm not there. They act like I don't exist. Okay. I think, as the pinnacle nation in the world, we have a responsibility to lead. Because if we don't, other people will take our position. And they will drive the boat in the opposite direction that we want to go in, which makes the world a much more dangerous place, particularly for those who are coming after us. It doesn't mean that we have to poke our noses in everybody's business. But the fact of the matter is, leadership, I think, has to do with also deterrence. And when, in fact, we present a very strong front, there are a lot of things that simply won't happen. I'll give you an example. In 1979, during the Iranian hostage crisis, they just flaunted it in our faces. And, they were really quite disrespectful. But the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated, they let the hostages go. Because, you don't even have to do anything. All you have to do is present the kind of face that is a deterrence, and a lot of things that we see happening simply won't happen. So I think we have the responsibility of doing that also for our allies, because they count on us. And a lot of the things that they do because they know that we're behind them, or they don't do because they don't think we're behind them. It's sort of like, when a little boy, little 3-year-old, knows that his daddy's behind him, he's a lot braver than when there's no daddy there.
Dr. Carson, many would argue that this election is much more than just electing a president, but electing a commander-in-chief. This topic came up the other night in the debate. Because leading our nation in dealing with demanding national security issues, it requires both positions to be filled, and filled well. What has prepared you most for this critical task? What strengths are your foundation for the trust and confidence our men and women in uniform must have in you to do what you have them do to preserve our way of life?
A very good question. There are many people who think that you need a long history in Washington to be a good commander-in-chief. Primarily people who have a long history in Washington. But, I think I can clearly say that I've had more 2 a.m. phone calls than everybody else combined, where you had to make critical life and death decisions very quickly. You had to gather the appropriate information, frequently from people who don't know what the appropriate information is, And so you have to be able to ask the right questions to get that, because someone's life is dependent upon it. I've also, I think, had a lot of experience putting together complex teams to accomplish things that have never before been accomplished, and even in a complex field like neurosurgery, and dealing with people with big egos. So, that means that, you have to be able to foster an atmosphere, define a goal, get people to agree with that goal, and then work with you, because, we have an incredible amount of talent in our country. It's mind-boggling if we're willing to use it. And a good leader doesn't necessarily know everything that has ever been known to man, but he certainly knows how to gather people who know lots of different things, organize them under an umbrella with the kind of leadership to get to the goal where you're going.
Dr. Carson, presidential leadership requires not only explaining the what to the American people, but also the why. How will your experience make this dimension a clear strength for you? How would President Carson embrace and leverage straight talk to ensure Americans understand the reality and danger of today's world, what must be done and why it must be done?
Well, I used to always tell the residents in neurosurgery that I expect them to go in and talk to the patient or to the family and explain to them what we were going to do and why. And I say, if they can't understand it when you get done, then you're not going to be able to operate. I'm not going to let you operate. Because they need to learn how to be able to explain things. And, the American people, quite frankly, need real explanations. Now, in the ideal situation, they will spend the requisite time to learn things on their own. But we know this is not the ideal situation. And most people are much more concerned about who's on Dancing with the Stars. So it is very important to really be able to sit down and make sure that they understand what the goals are. If people understand what the goals are, then they can put things in perspective. Give you an example. When people understand the financial condition of our country, which is very serious right now, the financial foundation is close to collapsing because of the way that we're accumulating debt. If they understand that, and then somebody comes along and says, free college, they understand. Okay, the appropriate response is to laugh and to say, are you kidding me? But when you don't understand things, you say, oh my, free college, this guy is great, and let's march right after him off the cliff.
Sir, defense spending is decreasing, while the pace of instability is increasing. Our military commitments are increasing concomitant with that. What are your concerns given the force-structured glide path we're on, and how would you address this deficit and imbalance as Commander-in-Chief, for it is upon us?
No question, it's a problem. Our Navy is at the smallest size since 1917. The Air Force since 1940. The sequestration is gutting, our personnel. And right now, we're spending about 3.4% of GDP for military expenditures. Traditionally, we have spent 4%. And that was at a time when we didn't have this level of danger. It makes absolutely no sense. It's almost like we're trying to set ourselves up for destruction. But at any rate, obviously, we should at least get back to the level that we have been at before. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't some waste. There's waste in everything. But, some people use that as an excuse to further cut our military. And that is not the right way to do it. There's waste in everything. There's 645 federal agencies and sub-agencies. I guarantee you there's waste in every one of them. And President Carson would cut that waste out, believe me, and use some of those resources to bolster our military. Because the fact of the matter is, if you don't get the military right, nothing else matters. Not in the world that we live in right now.
Dr. Carson, the Iran deal, controversial. Clearly a concern and more destabilizing, I would argue, than most are inclined to admit. Day one of a Carson administration, what would you have to do, or what do you think needs to be done?
Actually, I would start before day one, because as soon as I was elected, there'd still be a couple of months in between, I would start talking to our allies, because we have ruptured a lot of those relationships with this deal, particularly the people, throughout the Arabian Peninsula, and as well as our friends in Europe. They're wondering, whose side are we on anyway? And, we have the nerve, after we sign this agreement, to then go to, some of the other nations, Bahrain, Oman, and Qatar, and Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, and Egypt, and Jordan. And we say, can you guys be our boots on the ground? And we'll just supply the air power. And they're like, aren't you the ones who just stabbed us in the back by signing an agreement with Iran? It doesn't really make a lot of sense, so what we're doing. So I start repairing those relationships as well as with our European allies, because on day one, I would make it very clear to Ali Khamenei that we're tearing this thing up, and we're willing to talk with you, but we're going to talk rationally and not be trying to give you the store, which is what we've been doing right here. And that means I'm going to need our allies, because part of that talk is going to be sanctions. And I'm talking about really severe sanctions, the most severe sanctions anybody's ever seen before. And recognizing how dangerous a nuclear Iran is, because they've already declared their intention to destroy Israel, and they've said death to America. I would be looking at, if those sanctions didn't work, what other actions should be taken. But, this whole concept of let's not do things because somebody might get offended or somebody might, start warfare. Believe me, if you always take that tack, you're going to be taken advantage of. And a lot of people say, oh, Carson's too nice to do anything. I'm nice, but it doesn't mean that I don't want to protect the American people. There's a very big difference.
Dr. Carson, let's pick up on that and talk about radical Islam, the top terrorist groups in the world here, and most notably ISIS expansion. Major threats, all of them. In the news yesterday, a quote, intelligence officials state ISIS determined to strike the U.S. this year. What ideas do you have on how to counter it, contain it, and defeat it?
Well, one of the things I recommend to the American populace all the time is please read about Islam and try to understand who radical Islam is. I mean, go all the way back to Muhammad at Mecca, and then read how he had to move to Medina when his uncle who was protecting him died, and how he created his armies there, and he was the first caliph, and he had to have a caliphate, these territories, and how they wiped out all the Jews throughout the whole Arabian Peninsula, and the philosophy that they had of jihad, and how they wanted to bring the whole world into subjection. Because when you understand that, it helps to put things into perspective. And also recognize that there are different factions. There are those who look at just the Quran. There are those who, take the Hadith, which is sort of the life lessons from Muhammad, the fatwa. There's a whole group. You need to understand the radical element, who now wants to do the same thing. Now, fortunately, they were deprived of a caliphate from the time that the Ottoman Empire fell in 1924 until recently, when they gained land in Iraq and in Syria, and also with footholds in Egypt and Tunisia, and most alarmingly in Libya now. And they're sending lots of fighters over to Libya right now, because in talking about expanding a caliphate, look how big Libya is, compared to Iraq and Syria. And they've got a lot of oil, and it is strategically located, for both Europe and Africa. So we know that they're going to attack to that area, and we need to be dealing with that. But first things first, to delegitimize them, we must take their caliphate. That has to be our goal. We take it where we can. As far as Syria and Iraq is concerned, right now, they have a connection. We can cut that connection off. That's a very doable thing. And then look at what we were able to do with Sinjar a couple of months ago. Working with the Kurds, embedding our special ops people, cut off the supply routes to Sinjar, soften the city, then go in with our special ops and the Kurds, follow it with air power, and it was a relatively easy conquer. And that kind of thing can be done throughout. You'll have to use different tactics in different areas because they merge themselves among the people because they figure, we're not going to kill the people. But when we start taking their land in certain ways, they either have to capitulate to us or come out and fight us. And when they do that, we should be ready with our Apache helicopters and everything else that we need to really wipe them out. And then we have to take their revenue sources, the oil. I've been saying that for a long, long, long time. Donald Trump thinks he's the only one who's been saying it. And then you have to shut down all of their communication money transfer mechanisms because they go around the world and they try to recruit the disenfranchised people of the world, and they do it with money. If we shut off their mechanisms for transferring money, it's going to make it much more difficult for them, and we must attack their command and control centers. That is absolutely essential. And then also, we need to recognize that they're already over here. I was down on the border this summer, and the sheriffs were telling me about all the OTMs that were coming across, other than Mexicans, coming from Northern Africa, coming from the Middle East. And they are setting up in here, I guarantee you. And they're going to be causing more problems. San Bernardino might have been the beginning of it. We have to seal our border. And we have the ability to do that within a year's time. We've already had models of how that's done. In Yuma County, Arizona, they shut off 97% of the activity by putting in a layered fence with an asphalt road for quick access. And border guards. Now imagine that, border guards on the border. That's amazing. And then they prosecuted first-time offenders instead of the catch and release program, 97%. Do that in all 9 sectors rather than one sector. Add motion detectors and drones for early warning. You could make it 100%. Some people say they dig underneath. We have radar equipment that will show whether they're doing that. And then we also have to teach the American people what to do in case they're in a situation with terrorists. When I was a kid, they used to have air raid drills. And when the thing would ring, you knew where to go to duck and cover and all that stuff. We need to teach the people that. And, the Obama administration's ideal of taking care of this is to deprive the people of guns. I think it's really just the opposite. The government should be offering the people free courses in how to utilize guns in order to protect themselves. And then we need to be working with the imams and the clerics because they have to be on our side. They have to help us to detect the radicalized people. And if they're not willing to do that, we need to tell them, you're for us or you're against us. But because we are going to have to find a way to make sure that we protect our people. And we cannot be blinded by political correctness and let ourselves be destroyed. That's why I've called for investigation of CARE. Council on American Islamic Relations. We've seen through the Holy Land Foundation trial that they're not nearly as benign as we think they are. And there are other countries that have already declared them terrorist organizations.
Dr. Carson, let's turn to North Korea. In the headlines of late, a topic of great concern, are the current congressional sanctions enough? Is our North Korean policy off course? Do we have a clearly stated North Korean policy? And what are your thoughts on how to contain Kim Jong-Un, who today reportedly executed his military chief for corruption of all things? A dangerous place.
There is no question that Kim Jong-un, I think, is a little bit unstable. And that's an understatement. But we, I think, have not really presented the kind of obstacle to him that we should have. You know, when they attacked us, that cyber attack on Sony, I would not have ignored that. We have tremendous offensive cyber capabilities. I would have hit him so hard he would never even think about it again. Because when you don't challenge these things, you just encourage them. I think also, you know, we need to be doing everything we can to foster the relationship between South Korea and Japan. You know, there's been a lot of friction there in the past. And presenting a more united front in that very local area, I think, will help. Working with the Chinese, absolutely, we should do that. I think we need to be working on a strategic defense initiative. You know, Reagan was criticized for his thinking about Star Wars. Absolutely, that's what we need. We need the ability to be able to shoot down any missile, preferably before the multiple warheads deployed, but even after the multiple warheads have deployed. And, you know, we've gotten out of the space race. And this is a real problem because in the future, he who controls space will control the Earth. And then, lastly, I would make it very clear to Kim Jong-il that if he ever fires a missile at us, it'll be the last thing he does.
Staying in that hemisphere, let's talk about China, Dr. Carson. Spying, cyber, South China Sea, shipping lanes come to mind. What is your view, though, of the key challenges and concerns you would face as Commander-in-Chief, and what role do you see China having to play in global order as well?
Well, you know, the Chinese people are not pugilistic, but they are opportunistic. And when they see weakness, they will continue to push as far as they can possibly push. So, you know, we need to present a presence there. No question about it. And I think that includes a naval presence throughout that area because we have a lot of allies in that area who are sort of shaking in their boots a little bit as the Chinese rattle their sabers. We should never back down. We shouldn't concede to them. You know, the new islands, the Spratly Islands that they claim to own, and there's no legality for that. And I think we should press that case in the world court system, but at the same time present them with an obstacle there. And then I think we need to work on the economic front because, you know, that's what they respect the most. They know that there's not going to be a war between us and them, but they are really terrified of anything that affects them economically. And, you know, that's the reason that I've broken with several of my Republican colleagues about, you know, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Recognize that that was done as an executive deal, not as a treaty, which means the president has a great deal to do with the way it is implemented. And the current president is not going to be there by, you know, for maybe another month or two after the thing is ratified. And now I'm assuming that it's not going to be Hillary or that other guy, Bernie Sanders. I'm assuming that it's going to be somebody who's reasonable. And if somebody is reasonable there, you know, the changes can be made in it that, you know, remove the ability of, you know, World Trade Organization and the UN and other people to have the kind of influence over us. So I don't agree with that at all.
Vladimir Putin is in the headlines almost daily. His rhetoric and actions would indicate a potential return to a Cold War scenario, something that some of us in this room have dealt with in our careers. What would you do to confront him, to contain him? And if you can't contain him, how do you deter him?
Okay. Well, again, another opportunist and a bully and a very dangerous individual. And recognize that, you know, over the last few years, he has significantly upgraded his nuclear arsenal. We have not upgraded ours. Ours is old and decrepit. I'm not sure those doors would even open if you pushed a button, you know. So, you know, we need to fix that. But I would actually go and face him in his own territory. Throughout the whole Baltic Rim area, I would put in some more armored brigades in that area. I would be having very robust NATO exercises with Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania. I would reinstitute the missile defense system. I would give offensive weapons to Ukraine because they got rid of their nuclear arsenal, and there was a gentleman's agreement that we would step in if they were invaded. They were invaded. Did we step in? No. Did we do anything? Absolutely nothing. And then here's the other real key. Vladimir Putin is poor compared to us. His income source is oil, energy. We need to use our strength in the energy sector to keep him suppressed. It's the same kind of philosophy that Ronald Reagan used to bring down the Soviet Union. It's economic. And we have the ability to do that.
Dr. Carson, since Russia began its involvement in Syria, it's largely targeted, as we know, anti-Assad forces, including American-trained fighters. Today, what Russia is doing is directly enabling ISIL. It's strengthening the Syrian government here and worsening a humanitarian crisis and fueling extremism. What can and must the U.S. do? Because it is of great proportion and changing daily.
Well, we must keep our eye on the prize. Our prize is to destroy ISIL or ISIS. We need to destroy them. Now, the relationship that Putin has with Assad, notwithstanding, we can't let that get in the way. Should we be involved in the negotiations for regime change? Absolutely. But we can't let that get in the way of our primary objective, which is to destroy ISIS.
Let's turn to cybersecurity, and countering cyber terrorism. You talked about offensive cyber. Former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta has warned of a, quote, cyber Pearl Harbor that would involve several attacks on our critical infrastructure in combination with a physical attack. Are we really prepared? What steps would you take to deal with this? Because this issue is upon us, sir.
No, we are not prepared. And, cyber attack is the next real phase of weapons of mass destruction. And when President Obama a few weeks ago said that ISIS is not an existential threat to us, what planet is he living on? The fact of the matter, does he recognize cyber attacks can occur? Does he recognize that our electric grid is not hardened? Now, I know they've hardened it at some of the military facilities and some of the government facilities, but that doesn't help the rest of the country. That could set us back 4 decades. All they have to do is explode a nuclear weapon in our exoatmosphere at the right location, and we're back 4 decades. If at the same time a few dirty bombs are exploded, you think about the total chaos that would exist. So one of my high priorities, emergency, is to harden the grid and to provide several layers of alternative electricity. And if we don't do that in the world that we're living in, we are total fools. And right now we're acting like total fools.
Sir, after 20 years without it, the Navy has begun teaching sailors to navigate by the stars again because of the implications of EMP. This is a prudent step. But what else should we be doing to protect ourselves from cyber warfare threats? I'm looking across the national security military domain.
Yeah, well, recognize that in this country, we have some brilliant minds in the private sector as well as in the public sector. I believe that we should be encouraging a public-private relationship because, see, we're all in this boat together. And, if something happens to one, it happens to the other. So the government needs to be working on those kinds of relationships. I think it would make a huge difference. Almost all the different government agencies have cyber programs. And they're disjointed, and there's all kinds of overlap and duplication. That's why I've called for a solitary, National Cybersecurity Administration, which will work, for the entire government and eliminate all of this duplication and all this bureaucracy, because this is so important that we have to be able to respond rapidly and accurately to everything that's going on. The private sector, whenever they feel that they've been attacked, they need a central place that they can report that to and where action can be taken.
Dr. Carson, Edward Snowden has caused a major trust gap between the American people and the government, and between the U.S. and their allies. There are articles certainly weekly on this issue. And his actions have fueled controversy over mass surveillance, government secrecy, and the balance between national security and information privacy. How has this event affected how you would address the impact his actions have had on national security as you move forward?
Well, there's no question that his actions have been horrible. The effects have been horrible. I'm glad we know about some of the things the government was doing, but there were other mechanisms that he could have utilized that didn't jeopardize his country. So as far as I'm concerned, he's a traitor. Having said that, it is vitally important that we always protect our Fourth Amendment rights. People have a right to privacy, and they've, since our nation started. At the same time, of course, there are bad guys out there, and we have to have a mechanism for being able to track them. However, to me, that is a matter of improving the mechanisms for obtaining the kind of warrant that you need. Already it's pretty good, but we need to make it almost instantaneous so that whenever our crime solvers are looking to do something, they shouldn't be held up by not being able to get the appropriate authorization.
Sir, biological and chemical threats. We've talked about nuclear. What are the key issues your national security strategy must address?
Well, you probably saw the articles recently that ISIS has gained access to some of these. And of course, I don't see why they probably wouldn't use them. And again, this is an area where we need to educate the populace, because unfortunately, we're going to be hit. Okay, I hate to say it, but we are. And so we need to be starting right now figuring out how do we best protect the largest number of people, and how do we prevent total panic from occurring when it does. We need to be making appropriate equipment available to people, teach people where to go in order to get the equipment that's needed. And obviously, we need to be tracking down the sources, but obviously you can't get them all.
Dr. Carson, foreign and military aid, some would say these are soft power tools. But you touched on this in one of your answers earlier here, but the world has and continues to change and become more dangerous. Are we leveraging it effectively and optimally? There are articles where the warfighting commanders are concerned that the process is slow, unduly slow, because we can't go it alone. We need the allies' help. They depend on us to generate combat power through that foreign military aid program. Can you talk about that, please, sir?
Well, there's no question that we're not in this by ourselves. And our allies are extremely important to us, and we are extremely important to them. And when we present a united front, we are an incredibly formidable force. We're a formidable force by ourselves when we act in a responsible way, which we haven't done for several years now. So that is something that would be, for me, one of the highest priorities, is revitalizing the vital connections with our allies, so that we can present the right kind of face to those who are enemies.
I'm going to use a couple of the questions I got from the audience. I think it's important to capture what they've asked here, too, in light of the questions I've asked. But here's one that says, what is your take on the incoming refugees? You mentioned that, but the rate of increase in the refugee population is increasing. What are your plans to deal with that?
Well, as many people know, and if you haven't, please go to our website, bencarson.com, and read about it, foreign policy and how to protect America. I have advocated that we declare war on the Islamic State because they're at war with us. So that will automatically cause us to revamp our immigration and visa policies, because we have to be very careful about who we allow into this country. And the screening processes that we are using currently are certainly inadequate. As far as the Syrian refugees are concerned, I know that Justin Trudeau is bringing thousands of them in. Now we need to worry about the northern border as well as the southern border. But we have to do it. And here's the sad thing. When I went over to Jordan in November and talked to the Syrians, because I like to know for myself, because the administration, they love to give you false choices. They say your choice is we either take tens of thousands of these people, or we turn our backs and as hardened people who don't care about anybody else. But of course there was another option, and that option is to protect them over there and to repatriate them, which is what they really want. And if you look at Al-Asaka province in the northeast portion, it's the size of Lebanon. It's controlled by the Kurds and the Christians and the Sunnis, and they can be repatriated there as long as they have an international force to protect them.
Dr. Carson, what tools do you have to distinguish yourself from the other candidates?
What tools do I have? I have a power drill for opening the head.
You might want to go to soft power in that regard.
All kind of things they wouldn't recognize. But no, I'm not a politician. I think that's what distinguishes me. I do not have any obligations, because I will not take money from special interest groups or from billionaires who want to control things. And my slogan is accountable to everyone, beholden to no one.
Should America continue to support non-democratic governments that support our policies?
Well, I think you have to take it on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the situation is. For the most part, I'm not a person who wants to align myself with non-democratic governments like Cuba. And I personally not happy the way that we have interacted with Cuba, because Raul Castro is 83 or 84 years old. That means he ain't going to be there that much longer. And when they do the regime change, that's the time when you begin to negotiate with them, because that's when you have leverage. We don't have any leverage anymore. We've given the store away already. That doesn't make any sense. That's craziness. So for the most part, you use the influence that you have in order to change the regime.
Sir, please state your position on U.S. support for the nation of Israel.
I am probably the strongest supporter of Israel that you